Two Black Hawk helicopters circled low over Millbrook Park, rotors hammering the air hard enough to flatten the grass in perfect expanding circles. People on the sidewalk stopped mid-stride, phones already rising. A woman in a yellow jacket grabbed her daughter's hand and backed into a doorway. The birds weren't drifting. They were descending with purpose, the kind of controlled aggression that said military, not news crew, not traffic watch. Michael Torres stood 3 blocks from home with his daughter's hand in his. He felt it before he heard it. That particular frequency shift combat veterans never forget. The air pressure change that precedes something irreversible. 7 years since his last deployment, and his body still recognized the sound of rotors the way a sailor recognizes the ocean. Sophia looked up at him, all 7 years of her framed by 2 braids he'd done that morning, left side slightly looser than the right because that was always how it went when he did them himself. The first Black Hawk touched down. Side doors slid open before the wheels had fully settled. A man in army greens jumped out, already scanning, already moving, his voice cutting through the rotor wash like a physical thing. "Dr. Michael Torres, is he here? We need Dr. Michael Torres." Michael let go of Sophia's hand. Deliberate, gentle, the way you put down something precious before walking into fire. "Stay right here." Her eyes found his, steady and serious, in that way that reminded him every single day of the woman she'd never met. "Daddy." "Right here, Sophia. Don't move." He walked forward through the stopped pedestrians, past the woman in the doorway who'd pulled her daughter close, across the grass toward the 2 helicopters and the uniformed figures, and the colonel who was still scanning, still calling his name. The noise was immense. The downdraft pulled at his jacket. He could smell jet fuel and hydraulic fluid and that specific metallic edge that military aircraft carried with them like a signature. The colonel's eyes locked onto him. "Dr. Torres?" "That's me." The man crossed the distance between them in 10 strides, hand already extended, breathing hard. "Colonel James Wright, Medical Coordination, Joint Base Andrews. Sir, we have a critical trauma inbound. Sergeant David King, 31 years old, African-American male, EOD specialist. Training exercise at Fort A.P. Hill went catastrophically wrong. IED simulation detonated at close range. Blast injuries, severe internal hemorrhaging. Last blood pressure reading was 84/52, heart rate 128 and climbing. We estimate 30 minutes maximum before we lose him." Wright pulled a tablet from his tactical vest, already swiping. "Our primary trauma surgeon is in surgery at Walter Reed. Won't be available for 3 hours minimum. Our backup is currently over the Atlantic returning from Germany. You are the closest level 1 trauma surgeon within range with the specific combat field experience we need right now. Dr. Peterson at Johns Hopkins gave us your name. General Hartley authorized us to locate you directly." Michael touched the folded piece of paper in his inside jacket pocket. Still there. Still warm from being close to his body for the last 3 hours. Termination letter, signed by Patricia Reynolds, Administrative Director, Mercy Cross Hospital. Effective immediately. He looked back once. Sophia stood exactly where he'd told her to stand, backpack still on her shoulders, watching him with those eyes that missed nothing and forgave everything. She gave him one small nod. Michael turned back to Colonel Wright. "Tell me mechanism of injury, blast radius, distance from detonation point, and what imaging you've got." Wright was already moving toward the lead helicopter, tablet extended. "Walking or running, sir?" Michael took one step, then another, then he was running toward the open side door where 2 medics were already prepping equipment, and the last thing he saw before climbing in was Sophia standing on the sidewalk in the exact spot he'd left her, and 2 blocks behind her, a black sedan with its driver's side door open and a woman standing beside it who looked a lot like Patricia Reynolds, but he didn't have time to process that because the medic was handing him gloves and Wright was strapping in and the rotors were already spinning up. The door slid shut. The Black Hawk lifted. The ground fell away. Behind them, still standing beside her car with the door open and her hand on the frame like she needed it to stay upright, Patricia Reynolds watched the helicopter climb until it was just a dark shape against the afternoon sky, carrying the man she'd fired 4 hours earlier toward something she couldn't see and didn't understand, but somehow knew mattered more than anything she'd measured on a dashboard in her entire professional life. 12 hours earlier. The alarm hadn't gone off yet. Michael had been awake since 4:47 a.m. anyway, lying on his back in the dark, running through the surgery he had scheduled for 7:30. Walter Harris, 63 years old, retired school principal, aortic valve quietly betraying him for the past 2 years. Michael had fought 3 separate budget approval committees to get Walter's case prioritized on the surgical calendar. 3. The man had no premium insurance, just a pension and a garden and 6 grandchildren whose photos he kept in a laminated accordion fold in his shirt pocket. The bedroom door opened. Sophia stood in the doorway wearing the oversized Howard University t-shirt she'd stolen from his drawer 6 months ago and never returned. Her hair was still in the 2 braids from the night before, left side loose, right side tight. She held up his pager in one hand and his coffee mug in the other. Double-fisted. Michael sat up. Double-fisted. He took both. The pager showed 2 messages from the cardiac floor. Pre-op prep running behind schedule, anesthesiologist flagging a medication interaction in Walter's file that Michael had already reviewed and documented 2 days ago. He typed a response with his thumb while sipping the coffee. Strong. 2 scoops, no apologies, exactly the way he'd taught her to make it when she was 5 years old and insisted on helping. Hard day? He looked at her over the rim of the mug. 7 years old, asking him that question with the calm that children carry when they've learned early that the world is serious and they'd rather know the truth than be protected from it. Every day is hard when you care about what you're doing. That's not a complaint, baby. That's just a fact. She considered this slowly, quietly, like she was filing it somewhere important. Then she nodded and went to get her backpack. On the nightstand, the photo. Rachel, his wife, Sophia's mother, dead 7 years this September. Childbirth complications that came on fast and hard and left no time for the kind of interventions that save lives when you catch them early. The doctors at Mercy Cross had done everything right. Sometimes everything right still isn't enough. Rachel had made him promise something in those last minutes, when she knew and he knew, and neither of them had time to pretend otherwise. Don't let them turn medicine into just another business, Marcus. Be the doctor who remembers it's a calling. He'd been holding her hand when she said it. She'd squeezed once, hard, and then her grip had gone slack, and the monitors had started their terrible chorus, and Michael had been pulled away so the team could work, and by the time they let him back in, Rachel was gone and Sophia was here, 7 pounds 3 ounces, screaming her lungs out in the NICU, alive because the emergency C-section had worked and Rachel had died making sure it would. 7 years. He'd kept the promise every single day since. Michael got Sophia to school by 7:05. He was scrubbed in by 7:28. Walter Harris's surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. It went clean, the kind of clean that makes an operating room go quiet at the end, not because something went wrong, but because everything went exactly right, and the people in that room understood what that meant for the man on the table. When Michael stepped out of the OR, he felt the weight lift off his shoulders. Not completely, never completely, but enough to breathe, enough to check his phone, think about what he was going to make for dinner, remember that Sophia had a library book due tomorrow, and they needed to stop by on the way home. 3 missed calls, all from Patricia Reynolds. Patricia Reynolds was the administrative director of Mercy Cross Hospital, a title she'd held for 14 months, long enough to rearrange 3 departments, eliminate 2 physician liaison positions, and install a new metrics dashboard in the executive conference room that tracked operational efficiency in real time. She was 44, sharp-dressed, and possessed of the kind of confidence that came not from competence, but from certainty. Michael had been in enough combat zones to know those 2 things were rarely the same animal. He'd been in her office 4 times in the past 2 months. The first time she'd presented a budget restructuring plan that would reduce the cardiac surgery unit support staff by 30%. Michael had told her calmly, with data, that the reduction would extend average recovery times, increase complication rates, and expose the hospital to significant liability risk. She'd thanked him for his input and implemented the cuts anyway. The second time, she'd proposed eliminating the hospital's pro bono surgery allocation, the fund that had gotten Walter Harris on the table that morning. Michael had brought a stack of case files. He'd laid them on her desk one by one, named every patient, their ages, their conditions, their outcomes, what their lives looked like before they walked into Mercy Cross, and what they looked like after. She'd watched him do it with the expression of someone watching a clock tick, present but not listening. The allocation had been reduced by 60%. The third time, she'd called him in to discuss what she described as his communication style, which was apparently a concern because he'd sent a letter directly to the hospital board, bypassing her, outlining the patient safety implications of the staffing reductions. She'd called it a significant breach of protocol. He'd called it the job. They had not agreed. The fourth time was about to happen now. Michael knocked once on her open door and stepped in. Patricia was standing behind her desk, arms crossed. Two other people in the room, Thomas Martinez, head of HR, who never made eye contact during difficult conversations, and a woman Michael didn't recognize holding a legal notepad. Patricia gestured to the chair. "Close the door, Dr. Torres." He closed it. "Sit down." "I'll stand." A pause. She recalibrated. "We've had a number of conversations about your conduct, your ongoing failure to respect the administrative chain of command, your unilateral communications with the board, your repeated resistance to institutional decisions, and most recently," she picked up a sheet of paper, "your public statements to the nursing staff regarding the new staffing model, which we have on record as actively undermining hospital policy." Michael kept his hands loose at his sides. "I told the nursing staff the truth. The new staffing ratios are unsafe. I gave them documentation. I told them they had the right to report concerns through OSHA. That's not undermining policy. That's the law. It is insubordination." Patricia's voice carried that specific flatness of someone who has rehearsed this. "And it is the final instance in a pattern of conduct that this administration can no longer accommodate." Thomas Martinez slid a document across the desk. Michael looked at it without touching it. "You're firing me." It wasn't a question. "We are terminating your employment contract effective immediately, citing conduct incompatible with the administrative standards of this institution. You'll receive your final paycheck by direct deposit within 72 hours. Security will escort you to retrieve your personal items from your office." The room went very quiet. Michael picked up the termination letter. He read it once, not quickly, not slowly, but the way he read a patient chart before a complex procedure, systematically, completely, missing nothing. Then he folded it in half, then in half again, put it in the inside pocket of his white coat. "You want to know something, Patricia?" She didn't answer. "Walter Harris came out of surgery clean this morning, 63 years old, retired school principal. No premium insurance plan, no political connections, no one in this building who cared whether he lived or died except the people in that operating room. I fought 2 months to get him on that table." He let a beat pass. "You don't know his name. You've never known his name. And that right there is the entire argument." He turned and walked to the door. "Dr. Torres." Her voice was sharper now, the rehearsed flatness giving way to something else. "You are to surrender your access badge and your pager before you leave the premises." He unclipped the badge from his coat, set it on the edge of her desk without turning around. He kept the pager. "That's hospital property." "I know." He walked out. The walk from Patricia Reynolds's office to the hospital exit was 147 steps. Michael had walked it hundreds of times. He knew which corridor lights flickered, which elevator took longest, where the floor tile had cracked and been replaced with a slightly different shade. He walked it differently today. Not faster, if anything a fraction slower, but with a different kind of attention. The way he'd walked patrol routes in places where the ground itself couldn't be trusted. 2 nurses from the cardiac floor saw him in the hallway. Jessica Davis, charge nurse, 18 years at Mercy Cross, and one of the residents, Dr. Sarah Lee, second year. They both stopped. Jessica's face did something complicated that she controlled quickly, but not quite quickly enough. Dr. Torres. Not now, Jessica. She read his face, his posture, the white coat still on, but the badge missing from the lapel. They didn't. He kept walking. I'm filing a grievance. Don't. The hell I won't. Her voice followed him down the corridor, and he didn't turn back because if he turned back he might say something that would make this harder for her than it needed to be. And Jessica Davis was one of the good ones who would weather whatever storm came next, whether he was there or not. Outside, the afternoon had that particular quality of late spring light that makes everything look slightly more significant than it actually is. Gold and slanted, throwing long shadows, turning the ordinary into something a painter might stop to look at. Michael sat in his car in the parking structure for 20 minutes. Didn't start the engine, just sat with his hands on the wheel, the termination letter in his pocket, and the sound of his own breathing in the enclosed space. Then he drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital and sat in a corner booth with a glass of water he didn't drink, watching people who had jobs and schedules and normal problems that would be solved by normal solutions. At 2:45, he left to pick up Sophia. Amara Elementary let out at 3:15. Michael was standing on the sidewalk outside the main entrance at 3:14, hands in his pockets, still in his dress clothes, gray slacks, white shirt, the jacket with the folded letter in the pocket. He hadn't gone home first, hadn't called anyone, just sat in that coffee shop for an hour and a half, not thinking about anything in particular, and then walked here. Sophia came through the doors in a wave of kids, spotted him immediately, and walked directly to him without the slight pause of surprise that most children would have shown at seeing their parent at pickup instead of the after-school program. You're early. I am. She looked at him. Not at his face exactly, more at the whole of him, the way she'd always done, like she was reading something written in a language only she could see. Did something happen? Yes. Bad something or complicated something? He thought about it genuinely, the way she deserved. Complicated something. That might end up being okay. She slid her hand into his. Can we walk home? We're going to walk home. Good. I like walking with you. The walk from Sophia's school to their apartment was 1.5 miles through a neighborhood that was somewhere between what it used to be and what it was trying to become. Corner stores beside coffee shops. A barber shop with a hand-lettered sign next to a juice bar with a QR code on the window. Michael had walked this route hundreds of times. He knew which blocks had busted sidewalk squares, which dog was going to bark from behind which fence, where the light took too long and where it never seemed to change at all. They walked it in the afternoon quiet, Sophia matching his pace without having to think about it. She'd always been like that. Even as a toddler, she'd mirrored his energy without mimicking it, calmer when he was tense, more talkative when he was quiet, as if she was filling whatever space he left. Mrs. Patterson said I got the highest score on the reading comprehension test. What was the passage about? A man who built a boat by himself to sail somewhere nobody had sailed before. Did he make it? The story didn't say. It stopped right before he got there. What do you think happened? She considered. I think he made it, but I think it was harder than he thought it would be. Michael looked down at her. Yeah. That sounds about right. They walked another block in silence. Daddy. Yeah? Are we going to be okay? He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He crouched down so they were eye level, right there on the sidewalk, and he took her face gently in both hands, his big surgeon's hands, which had been steady in operating rooms on 3 continents, holding her small, serious face. We are going to be okay. Not because nothing hard is happening, but because hard things have happened before, and we're still here. You and me. You and me. She nodded once, the way she always did when she'd received a piece of information and filed it correctly. Then she took his hand again, and they started walking. Can we have jerk chicken tonight? We can have jerk chicken. With the rice or without? With the rice, Sophia. What kind of question is that? She almost smiled, not quite, but almost, which from Sophia was practically a standing ovation. They were 3 blocks from home when Michael felt it. He couldn't have explained it to anyone who hadn't experienced it, but combat veterans understand this. There is a frequency that precedes certain events. Not a sound exactly, not a feeling, something older than both. A shift in the air pressure of reality. A half-second warning that the present is about to become something else. He heard it a moment later. Rotors. 2 sets. Heavy. Rhythmic. Not a news helicopter. Not a traffic chopper. Military. Cargo class. The kind of aircraft that doesn't drift over residential neighborhoods on a Tuesday afternoon without a reason. He tracked the sound without stopping, without looking up. Sophia heard it too. He felt her grip tighten slightly on his hand. Daddy. I hear it. The helicopters came in low over the park at the end of the block. Millbrook Park, 2 acres of patchy grass and old oak trees, and a concrete path that looped around a fountain that had been broken since November. They didn't pass over. They descended. Michael stopped. The aircraft were military Blackhawks modified. He could see even from here the medical cross insignia on their flanks. They came down hard and fast into the park's open field, the rotor wash flattening the grass in perfect expanding circles, sending pigeons scattering in every direction, scattering the 3 elderly men who'd been playing chess at the concrete tables near the fountain. People on the street stopped, some backed away, some pulled out their phones. A woman grabbed her child and stepped into a doorway. Michael stood completely still. The side doors of the lead helicopter slid open before the wheels had fully settled. Uniformed figures jumped out, and one of them, an officer in army greens with the insignia of a colonel, was already scanning the street, already moving, already calling. Dr. Michael Torres. Is he here? Where is he? We need Dr. Michael Torres. Michael let go of Sophia's hand, gently, deliberately. Stay here, right here, don't move. Daddy. I know. Stay here. He walked forward through the stopped pedestrians, past the woman in the doorway, across the grass toward the 2 helicopters, and the uniformed figures, and the colonel who was still scanning, still calling his name, until the colonel's eyes landed on him, and the distance between them closed in 10 strides, and a handshake that was already happening before Michael fully registered the words coming at him fast and hard and professional. Dr. Torres, Colonel James Wright, Medical Coordination, Joint Base Andrews. Sir, we have a critical trauma inbound. Military personnel, male, 31 years old. Blast injuries, internal hemorrhaging, estimated 30 minutes before we lose him. Our on-site surgeon is in surgery at Walter Reed. Our backup is in the air over the Atlantic. You are the closest level 1 trauma surgeon within range with the specific field experience we need right now. Dr. Peterson at Johns Hopkins gave us your name. General Hartley authorized us to locate you directly. Michael looked at him. He looked at the helicopter, at the medical crew moving equipment inside, at the second aircraft holding position 20 yards away. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and touched the folded piece of paper, the termination letter, still warm from being close to his body for the last 3 hours. Then he turned back to Colonel Wright. Tell me the mechanism of injury, blast radius, distance from detonation, and what imaging you have. Wright was already reaching for a tablet. Walking or running, sir? Michael looked back once at Sophia, standing exactly where he'd told her to stand, her backpack on her shoulders, watching him with those steady, serious eyes. She gave him one small nod, like she'd known all along. He turned back to the helicopter. Running. And Dr. Michael Torres, fired by a hospital that morning, walking home with his daughter that afternoon, ran toward the aircraft, toward the work, toward the only version of himself he had ever truly been. Behind him on the sidewalk, a woman named Patricia Reynolds had stopped her car 2 blocks back when she'd seen the helicopters descend. She was standing outside it now, door still open, watching the man she had fired 4 hours ago climb into a military aircraft with the body language of someone returning to his element, completely, undeniably, in a way that made her chest feel strange and her certainty feel very, very small. She watched until the helicopter doors closed. She watched until the rotors spun back up. She watched until there was nothing left to watch but empty sky and the slow dispersal of the crowd that had gathered to witness something they didn't understand but somehow knew mattered. Then she got back in her car and sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing, while the afternoon light turned gold and slanted around her and the world kept moving like nothing had changed at all. The helicopter lifted before the door was fully latched. Michael felt the familiar pull in his stomach. Not fear exactly, but that sharp animal awareness of being airborne and committed, the ground falling away, and every decision made in the last 10 minutes becoming permanently irreversible. He'd felt it in Kandahar. He'd felt it in Mosul. He hadn't felt it in 4 years, and his body recognized it the way a man recognizes the smell of his childhood home, instantly, involuntarily. Somewhere beneath language. Colonel Wright was across from him, tablet open, talking fast. The 2 medics in the back were moving equipment with the efficient silence of people who'd done this so many times that words had become unnecessary. His name is Sergeant David King, 31, Explosive Ordnance Disposal Specialist. Training exercise in Virginia, IED simulation went catastrophically wrong. He took primary blast at approximately 4 meters. We believe he has a ruptured spleen, possible liver laceration, and based on his vitals over the last 22 minutes, he is bleeding internally at a rate that won't give us the time to get him to a full trauma center. Wright swiped the tablet screen, pulled up vital signs. What's his pressure? 84/52 when we got the last reading. That was 6 minutes ago. Heart rate 128. Michael processed this without expression. 84/52. Heart rate climbing to compensate for volume loss. The body doing what bodies do, desperately, stubbornly trying to maintain itself against the mathematics of hemorrhage. He had seen those numbers before. He knew exactly what they meant and how much time they represented. What do I have to work with? One of the medics, young, female, specialist rank, name tape reading OKAFOR, turned from the supply case. We have a full surgical kit, 2 units of O-negative, 1 unit of fresh frozen plasma, suction, cauterizing equipment, and a light array. The aircraft has been modified for in-flight surgical procedures, sir. This bird has done it before. Has it done it with a liver laceration? Okafor met his eyes. No, sir. Okay. Has he been intubated? Oral tube placed 12 minutes ago, sedated with ketamine and midazolam. Standard field protocol. Who placed the tube? The second medic, young man, steady hands, name tape reading Burroughs, looked up. I did, sir. First placement. Good waveform. Good. Michael was already pulling on gloves. Let me see him. They moved aside. Sergeant David King was strapped to the aircraft's modified surgical platform, a flat padded surface with grab rails and a mounting system for the light array. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, the kind of man who looked like he was built for exactly the kind of work he did. His uniform had been cut away from his torso. His abdomen was distended in a way that Michael recognized immediately and grimly. The bruising along his left flank was already deepening into the aubergine color that meant blood collecting in spaces where blood should not be. Michael pressed 2 fingers below the ribs on the left side. King didn't react, sedation holding, but Michael felt it, the rigidity, the fullness. He's bleeding from the spleen, and I'd bet the left lobe of the liver. How long to the nearest facility with a full OR? 46 minutes. Wright's voice was flat, professional, but Michael heard what was underneath it. We tried. The math doesn't work. The math doesn't work. Michael repeated it, not as a question, but as a confirmation he was giving himself. He straightened up, looked at Burroughs. I need you across from me. Hands ready. You do exactly what I tell you, exactly when I tell you. Okafor, suction and light. Keep them where I need them. Colonel, stay clear of the surgical field and hold this aircraft as steady as God will allow. Wright was already on the headset to the pilot. You heard the man. Steady as you've ever flown. The pilot's voice came back dry and professional. I'll pretend we're parked, sir. Do better than pretend. Michael uncapped the betadine. Let the ritual take over, the specific practice sequence of preparation that surgeons build over years until it becomes something deeper than habit, something closer to prayer. Each step deliberate, each movement purposeful. The helicopter hit a pocket of air turbulence and lurched. Michael's hands did not move. Scalpel. Burroughs placed it in his palm. Stay with me, Sergeant King. I've got you. He made the first incision. There is a silence that descends in an operating space when a surgeon who knows exactly what he is doing takes control of an emergency. Not the silence of absence. The helicopter was loud, the rotors were loud, the wind outside was loud, but the silence of everything unnecessary falling away. Language, doubt, the past, the future, all of it reduced to the immediate, irreducible present of the body beneath the hands. Michael had lived in that silence for most of his adult life. He'd found it first in medical school, in the cadaver lab, when everyone else was pale and queasy, and he was calm in a way he hadn't been able to explain then and couldn't fully explain now. He'd found it deeper in residency, and deeper still in the field, in tents and Humvees and forward operating bases where the equipment was improvised and the lighting was bad, and the patients came in conditions that no textbook adequately prepared you for. He'd learned that surgery in impossible circumstances was still surgery. The principles did not change because the ceiling was canvas instead of tile. The blood was the same, the anatomy was the same, the responsibility was the same. He worked through the abdominal wall in layers, exposing the peritoneal cavity. Blood welled up immediately, dark, venous, too much of it. He could see the spleen's inferior pole, lacerated, actively bleeding. Suction. Okafor moved it into position. Michael packed the area, applied pressure, bought himself 30 seconds to assess. Afghanistan, 2012. A different tent, a different patient. A 19-year-old private from Nebraska who'd stepped on an IED that shouldn't have been there. Michael had worked for 47 minutes trying to control the bleeding, trying to keep the kid's pressure up long enough to get him evacuated, and the kid had looked at him with eyes that were already going glassy and asked if he was going to make it home. Michael had lied. He'd said yes. The kid died 3 minutes later. Rachel's voice in his head, a memory from the night he'd come home from that deployment and couldn't sleep and found her awake in the kitchen at 3 a.m. You can't save everyone, Marcus. You weren't trained to save everyone. You were trained to save who you can. He'd asked her how she lived with that. The ones you couldn't save. She'd said, you don't live with it, you carry it, and you use the weight to remember why the next one matters. Pressure coming up. Okafor's voice pulled him back. He checked the monitor. 91/60. Good. Start the second unit. I need to look at the liver. Sir, the left lobe exposure in this position. I know. Do it anyway. Retractor. Burroughs adjusted. The light array shifted. Michael worked deeper, his hands moving with the economy of someone who has no motion to waste. He found the laceration, a 5-centimeter tear along the anterior left lobe, actively bleeding but not catastrophically. The kind of injury that was survivable if you reached it in time and unsurvivable if you didn't. Talk to me, Burroughs. Michael's voice was steady, conversational. Not because he needed distraction, but because keeping his team verbal kept them sharp. Scared people make mistakes. Burroughs blinked, surprised by the question. Sir? Where are you from? Alabama, sir. Huntsville. You always want to be a medic? No, sir. Wanted to be a pilot. Washed out of flight school. Turned out I had steadier hands for surgery than for stick. Sometimes the thing that doesn't work out is pointing you somewhere better. Michael placed a clamp, adjusted angle. Suction right there. Yes, sir. You're doing well, Burroughs. The young man exhaled slowly. Thank you, sir. The helicopter lurched again, harder this time. The light array swung 2 inches. Michael did not lift his eyes from the surgical field. He adjusted his angle by feel, by the interior map he carried of human anatomy that 16 years of surgery had burned into his hands until it was as natural as his own heartbeat. "We've got crosswind," the pilot's voice came through the cabin speakers. "Doing my best." "I know you are. Keep it together. We're close." He sutured the laceration in 4 layers. The first 2 were internal, absorbable, careful, the kind of work that would hold through recovery if David King had a recovery to go to. The last 2 were reinforcing. He worked quickly but not hastily, because there is a difference between those 2 things that separates surgeons who save people from surgeons who try to. Pressure. 104/72. Okafor's voice was different now, still professional but with something underneath it. Heart rate 106 and dropping. "He's stabilizing." Burroughs said it almost to himself. "He's stabilizing. Hold that thought and hand me the irrigation." By the time the helicopter touched down at Walter Reed, David King had a blood pressure of 112/78 and a heart rate of 94. He was still sedated, still intubated, and he would need a proper OR for follow-up and close monitoring for the next 72 hours. But he was alive, measurably, functionally, irreversibly alive in a way he would not have been without the man who'd been walking home with his daughter 43 minutes earlier. The trauma team that met them on the landing pad moved fast. They'd been briefed in flight. The handoff was clean. In 30 seconds, the gurney was rolling through the bay doors, and Michael was standing on the tarmac with his hands still gloved, watching David King disappear into the building that would finish what the helicopter had started. Colonel Wright stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Dr. Torres," Wright's voice was quiet. I need you to know that I've been in this work for 19 years. I've seen surgeons, good ones, in terrible conditions." He paused. "What you just did in that aircraft." He trailed off. "He's not out of the woods. He needs the follow-up laparotomy and close monitoring for the next 72 hours. Make sure the attending knows there's a small secondary concern on the right lobe. I didn't think it was actively bleeding, but I want it watched." "I'll make sure they know." Michael peeled off the gloves, dropped them in the biohazard receptacle by the bay door. He was aware suddenly of how tired he was. Not the physical exhaustion of the surgery, which his body knew how to manage, but the deeper tiredness that comes from emotional weight carried too long without being set down. "I need to call my daughter." Wright already had a phone extended. "Take all the time you need, sir. There's a car waiting for you whenever you're ready." Sophia answered on the second ring. "Daddy." "Hey, baby. I'm okay." "I know." Her voice was steady, matter-of-fact, like she'd never doubted it. "Miss Rodriguez from 4B is here with me. She brought plantains." Michael closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Mrs. Rodriguez was their neighbor, a 70-year-old Jamaican woman who had, over the 3 years they'd lived in the building, quietly appointed herself a kind of unofficial grandmother to Sophia in ways that Michael had never asked for and never knew how to adequately thank her for. "Tell her I said thank you." "I already did. She said you don't have to thank her. You just have to eat something when you get home, because she says you never eat enough and you're going to disappear." "She's not wrong." "Are you coming home soon?" "Soon. Within the hour." "Okay." A pause. "Did you save somebody?" "Yeah." "Good." Sophia said it simply, as if the entire matter had been settled to her satisfaction. "Miss Rodriguez says eat when you get home. I say the same thing, 2 against 1. You never had a chance." "I love you, Daddy." "Love you too, baby." He hung up, stood with the phone in his hand for a moment, looking up at the sky, which had gone from that gold late-afternoon light to the thin early evening blue that comes just before dusk. "Dr. Torres." He turned. Colonel Wright was behind him, but he wasn't alone anymore. Beside him was a woman in civilian clothes, early 40s, silver-streaked dark hair, carrying herself with the kind of authority that doesn't need a uniform to make itself known. She had the eyes of someone who made decisions that affected large numbers of people and had made peace with that responsibility a long time ago. "Dr. Torres, I'm Dr. Linda Scott. I'm the medical director of the Army's Trauma Preparedness Division. I've been on the phone for the last 30 minutes with people who would very much like to have a conversation with you." She extended her hand. Michael shook it. "Ma'am, I'm not here to ambush you, and I'm not going to take up a lot of your time tonight. You just performed an in-flight hepatic repair under field conditions, at altitude, in a moving aircraft, on a patient who had a blood pressure that most surgeons would have called a non-survivable vital sign. I want to say 2 things to you." "Go ahead." "The first is thank you. On behalf of Sergeant King and his family, and everyone in his unit, and everyone who loves him." She held his gaze directly when she said it, the way people do when they mean something, and they want you to know they mean it. "The second is that I know what happened this morning at Mercy Cross Hospital. I know you were terminated, and I know why." Michael was quiet. "I have no interest in interfering in a civilian institution's administrative decisions, but I do have considerable interest in what happens to surgeons like you, and I have a proposal. Not tonight. Tonight you should go home to your daughter and eat whatever your neighbor brought you, but I would like to request a meeting. Tomorrow, if you're willing. There are people who want to talk to you about your future, and those people have the ability to make your future look considerably different than this morning suggested it would." Michael looked at her for a long moment. He had spent the last 4 hours being fired, walking home, watching military helicopters land in a public park, performing emergency surgery in a moving aircraft, and standing on a tarmac, talking to people who kept telling him he was remarkable, while the place that had employed him for 2 years had just decided he was a liability. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Sergeant King, David, does he have family?" Scott's expression shifted just slightly. "Just enough." "A wife, 2 daughters. The younger one is 4. Michael nodded slowly. "Then we're not talking tonight. Tomorrow I'll hear whatever you have to say. But tonight, I'm going home." "That's exactly right. That's exactly what you should do." The car they sent him home in was government issue, black, clean, driven by a quiet corporal named Whitfield, who seemed to understand instinctively that his passenger was not looking for conversation. Michael sat in the back and watched the city go by through the window, the streetlights coming on one by one in the softening evening, the neighborhoods shifting and changing as they moved from the military compound back into the civilian world that he moved through every day. He thought about Patricia Reynolds. Not with anger. He'd moved past anger somewhere in the coffee shop that afternoon, sometime during the second glass of water, when he'd sat with the termination letter folded in his pocket and felt the first hard thing becoming slowly manageable. He thought about her the way you think about a decision made under the influence of incomplete information. Not with fury, but with clarity that comes when you understand what someone was missing when they acted. She was missing Walter Harris. She was missing the nursing staff he'd trained. She was missing the 2 residents who had come specifically to Mercy Cross because of his reputation and who would now most likely follow him wherever he went next. She was missing 14 years of military medicine, and what that does to a person's ability to function under conditions that would paralyze someone whose only experience of high-stakes decisions was budget reviews and board presentations. She had seen a man who wouldn't follow her rules and called it insubordination. She had not seen what insubordination actually looked like from someone who'd spent 3 deployments learning the difference between a rule that protects people and a rule that protects institutions. Michael had never confused those 2 things in his life, and he wasn't about to start. "Sir?" Corporal Whitfield's voice was quiet from the front. "We're about 2 minutes out." "Thank you, Corporal." A pause. "Can I—" "Sorry, sir. It's not my place." "Go ahead." Whitfield glanced in the mirror. He looked young, mid-20s, the age that Michael had been when he was first deployed, when the weight of what the job actually meant was just starting to become real. "My uncle was an Army surgeon, retired 3 years ago. He always said the hardest thing wasn't the surgeries, it was everything around the surgeries." He was right. He also said the right people always end up exactly where they're supposed to be, even if it takes a minute. Michael was quiet for a moment. Your uncle sounds like a smart man. Yes, sir, he is. The car pulled up in front of the building. Michael got out, stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at the lit window on the 4th floor. His apartment, his daughter, Mrs. Rodriguez's plantains, and whatever other domestic normalcy was waiting for him behind that specific square of warm yellow light. He walked in, took the stairs. On the 2nd floor landing, he passed Mr. Diaz from 2C, who was always in the hallway in the evenings with no apparent explanation, and who looked at Michael's dress clothes and the dried telltale traces on his cuffs, which even the most careful surgeon accumulates during the kind of work he'd done this afternoon, and simply nodded with the respect of one man who'd seen hard things for another. On the 4th floor, before he even had his key out, the door opened. Sophia was standing there in the Howard t-shirt, braids still slightly uneven on the left side, a small line of concern between her eyebrows that she'd probably been carrying for the last hour and would not admit to. You ate? Not yet. Come in. Miss Rodriguez left you a plate. She said it like it was her house and he was a guest who'd been expected. He stepped inside. The apartment smelled like fried plantains, and the candles Sophia liked that smelled like cedar and vanilla, the one her grandmother had sent from Georgia that they kept on the windowsill. The evening news was on with the volume low. His medical textbooks were stacked on the coffee table next to Sophia's library book about the man who built a boat to sail somewhere nobody had sailed before. He sat down on the couch. Sophia sat beside him and tucked her feet under her the way she always did. After a moment she leaned her head against his arm without saying anything. He put his arm around her. They sat like that while the city moved outside the window and the news murmured something about the world being the way the world always was. Daddy? Yeah? The man in the helicopter. Is he okay? He's going to be. She was quiet for another moment. Do you think the people who fired you know what happened today? Michael looked down at the top of her head, at the braids, left side looser, right side tighter. I think some people have to watch something happen before they understand what it means. And some people still don't understand after. He looked at her. Mrs. Patterson said that. She explained about learning. She said some people see the answer and still don't learn, and some people just need to see it once. Mrs. Patterson is a good teacher. She's the best teacher. Sophia said it firmly, in the tone that brooked no argument. He held his daughter a little tighter. Outside, the city settled into sounds of a Tuesday evening. Cars, voices, a dog somewhere, the muffled rhythm of music from an apartment above them. Normal, ordinary, the steady bass note of a life being lived. In the inside pocket of his jacket, still folded in quarters, was a termination letter from a hospital that had fired him at 9 o'clock this morning. In his hands that were at this moment holding a 7-year-old girl who thought he was capable of handling anything, was everything that actually mattered. He sat with both things at the same time. That was the job. That had always been the job. Not just the surgery, but the sitting with both things at the same time. The holding of loss and purpose together without letting go of either. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A text from an unsaved number. Dr. Torres. Colonel Wright here. David King is in follow-up surgery and the attending confirmed your read on the right lobe. He's going to make it. His wife wanted me to tell you. Her name is Angela. Their daughters are named Emma and Zoe. She says thank you. He read the text twice, set the phone face down on the cushion beside him. Good news? Sophia asked without lifting her head. Good news. She made a small sound of satisfaction, like a person who'd been right about something all along. Then your plate's in the microwave. Miss Rodriguez said 2 minutes, not more, or the plantains get chewy. 2 minutes. Go eat, Daddy. He kissed the top of her head, stood up, walked to the kitchen to heat the plate that his neighbor had left for a man she'd believed in without knowing what he was capable of, which he thought was maybe the purest form of belief there was. The next morning came earlier than Michael would have liked, but exactly when his body expected. He was up at 4:47 again, not because of a pager this time. He'd surrendered his hospital pager the day before, set it on the edge of Patricia Reynolds's desk, along with 4 years of his professional life at Mercy Cross. But because his body had been waking him before dawn since Kandahar, and 11 years out of the army hadn't changed that, and he'd stopped expecting it to. He made coffee, stood at the kitchen window in the gray pre-morning light, and drank it slowly, watching the street below come back to life in the incremental way it always did. A delivery truck first, then a jogger, then the woman from the dry cleaner 3 doors down who arrived an hour before she opened and whose discipline he had always privately respected. Normal, ordinary. A Wednesday morning in a city that had no idea what had happened on a landing pad at Walter Reed the evening before. His phone rang. The number was the same unsaved one from last night. "Dr. Torres?" "Good morning, sir. Colonel Wright. I'm sorry for the early call. I was up. I assumed." A brief pause, and Michael could hear in it Wright preparing to say something he wasn't entirely sure how to begin. "Dr. Scott wanted me to reach out personally before the meeting this morning. She wanted you to know, and this is coming directly from her, that the conversation today is entirely on your terms. No pressure, no obligation. She recognizes that you've had a significant 24 hours, and she doesn't want to compound that with anything that feels like another institution making demands of you." "I appreciate that. Where and when?" "There's a conference room reserved at the Marriott on 16th Street. 10 o'clock. Dr. Scott will be there, and there are 2 other people who've asked to be present. I'll let her introduce them. It shouldn't be more than 90 minutes. I'll be there." Another pause. Then Wright said in a different register, quieter, less official. "Dr. Torres, I was in that helicopter with you for 43 minutes yesterday. I want you to know that I've written a lot of after-action reports in my career. I don't know what the right words are for what I watched you do. I wanted to say that before today." Michael looked out the window at the street below. The dry-cleaning woman was unlocking her door. "How's he doing, David?" "Resting, stable. Angela was with him when I left last night. She had both girls with her. The little one fell asleep on the waiting room chair and the older one stayed awake reading to her mother." Michael was quiet for a moment. "Good. I'll see you at 10. He got Sophia ready for school the way he always did. Breakfast, braids, left side still slightly looser than the right because some things were consistent whether the world was orderly or not. She ate her oatmeal with focused efficiency, asked him twice about his meeting without asking what the meeting was about, which was her way of saying she knew the meeting mattered and she trusted him to handle it. At the door, backpack on, she turned and looked at him with the full seriousness of her 7 years. "Wear the blue tie." "I wasn't going to wear a tie." "Wear the blue tie, Daddy." He wore the blue tie. The conference room at the Marriott was on the 3rd floor, quiet and neutral, the way hotel conference rooms always are. Dr. Scott was already seated when he arrived, along with Colonel Wright and 2 other people. A man in his late 50s in a dark suit who introduced himself as Robert Hayes, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Health Affairs at the Department of Defense, and a woman who looked to be in her early 30s, sharp-eyed and professional, who said her name was Captain Jennifer Davis and she was legal counsel for the medical division. Michael shook hands with each of them, sat down, accepted the coffee that was offered, and waited. Scott didn't make him wait long. "Dr. Torres, I'm going to be direct because I think that's what you prefer. And frankly, it's what I prefer too." She folded her hands on the table. "What you did yesterday afternoon was not unusual for you. We know that. We've looked at your record, your full record, military and civilian, both. 231 successful surgeries in field conditions during 3 deployments. A commendation from General Peterson. A Bronze Star for actions at FOB Salerno that the citation describes with language I don't usually see in official documents. And 2 years at Mercy Cross where your patient outcomes were, by every measurable standard, the best in the institution." She paused. "And yet?" "And yet," Michael agreed without flinching. "Administrative conflicts have consequences that don't always track with merit. We know that too. What we're here to discuss is what happens next." Hayes leaned forward slightly. He had the manner of a man who chose his words with the care of someone who knew that words once said in rooms like this one became part of a record. Dr. Torres, the Department of Defense has a program. It's not widely publicized by design that places highly specialized civilian medical talent in advisory and operational roles that support military trauma readiness. It's a hybrid arrangement. You maintain your civilian practice, but you're on call for exactly the kind of situation that occurred yesterday. High-acuity field condition trauma. The cases nobody else can handle. And the civilian practice. Michael's voice was even. That's actually the more interesting part of this conversation. Scott pulled a folder from her briefcase, opened it. We've been in contact with Mercy Cross Hospital's board of directors. They're aware of yesterday's events. They've received communications from the Army Surgeon General's office expressing, and I'm quoting directly, significant appreciation for your contributions to military medical readiness. They've also received calls from several major donors and a formal inquiry from the State Medical Board's Patient Safety Division regarding the staffing changes implemented over the past 14 months. She looked up. We believe they will be highly motivated to reconsider their administrative priorities. Michael's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. A text from a number he recognized from 2 years of working at Mercy Cross. Dr. Torres, I would like to speak with you at your convenience, privately. I know I have no right to ask. I'm asking anyway. Patricia Reynolds. He read it once, set the phone face down. Everything all right? Scott asked. Yes, continue. The meeting lasted 2 hours instead of 90 minutes, and by the end of it Michael had not agreed to anything, which was exactly where he intended to be. He had listened. He had asked questions, specific technical questions about contractual structure, liability coverage, on-call parameters, and the precise nature of his civilian practice arrangement, and he had received answers that were more detailed and more carefully considered than he had expected, which told him that these people had done their homework and were serious. He had also told them clearly and without apology that he had one condition that preceded all others. Whatever civilian practice arrangement they proposed, he would review it with his own legal counsel. He would negotiate his own terms, and there would be no compromise on patient care standards, not as a preference, as a non-negotiable. Hayes had nodded as if he'd anticipated exactly this. We wouldn't expect anything less, Dr. Torres. And I need 48 hours before I give you any answer. I have a daughter to think about and a life that changed significantly in the last 24 hours, and I don't make decisions about my future in conference rooms. Scott had leaned back in her chair, something that might have been approval crossing her face. 48 hours, absolutely. He stood, shook hands again with all of them, and was almost at the door when Captain Davis spoke for the first time since the initial introductions. Dr. Torres. He turned. She was looking at him with the direct, evaluating gaze of someone who has spent a career in operating rooms and has developed an instinct for reading people the way surgeons read bodies, with clinical precision and personal investment at the same time. I watched your debrief recording from the helicopter, Specialist Okafor's body camera footage. They didn't tell you it was recording. I assumed it was. Everything in a military aircraft is recording. You talked to your medic while you were working, asked him where he was from, told him he was doing well. Michael waited. Scared people make mistakes. I needed him steady. That's not why you did it. You did it because you understood that he was a person in a hard situation and that a human voice saying human things makes the hard situation survivable. You did it because you're a physician who remembers what the physician part means. She paused. We need more of that. That's all I wanted to say. Michael looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, the single deliberate nod of someone receiving something they intend to carry carefully. Thank you, Captain Davis. He walked out of the conference room and took the elevator down alone. In the 30 seconds between the third floor and the lobby, he stood with his eyes open and his hands still, and let himself feel for just a moment the sensation of a door opening where 24 hours ago there had been only wall. He called Patricia Reynolds back from the lobby of the hotel, standing near a window with the city moving past outside. She answered on the first ring. Dr. Torres, thank you. Her voice was different than he'd ever heard it. Smaller somehow, less armored. "I have 20 minutes. Where are you?" I'm at the hospital, but I can come to you. Just tell me where." He named the coffee shop 2 blocks from Mercy Cross, the same one where he'd sat the day before with a glass of water and a folded termination letter, which felt in that way certain coincidences feel like something the universe was doing on purpose. 30 minutes. I'll be there. She arrived in 25, which told him something. She was in civilian clothes, dark slacks and a gray cardigan, not the sharp administrative armor of blazers and structured skirts that she wore at the hospital. She looked smaller in them, not diminished, but the way people look when they've taken off the thing they hide behind and what's left is just a person. She sat down across from him, didn't order anything, looked at him with an expression of someone who has rehearsed what they want to say and has decided in the last 30 seconds to abandon the script entirely. "I saw the helicopters. I was leaving. I just got into my car and I saw them come down and I didn't—" She stopped, steadied herself. "I didn't put it together immediately. And then I heard the officer call your name and I stood there." Michael waited. "I watched you go in. I watched the helicopters leave." She looked down at the table and then back up at him. "And then I sat in my car for 45 minutes in the parking structure and I called my sister." A beat. "I told her what I'd done, what I'd said to you, and she asked me one question." Patricia met his eyes. She asked me, "Did you know who he was when you fired him?" And I said yes. And she said, "Then you knew exactly what you were throwing away, and you did it anyway." And I didn't have an answer for that. Michael held her gaze. "What do you want from this conversation, Patricia?" She didn't look away. "I want to apologize, not for the institution, for me personally. I was so focused on the metrics, on what I could measure and report and present to the board, that I turned a man who was saving lives into a line item in a conflict management file. And I was wrong. I was wrong about the staffing model. I was wrong about the pro bono allocation. And I was wrong about you." Michael absorbed this. He had thought on the walk over about what he would feel in this moment if it came. He'd wondered if it would be anger or satisfaction or something cold and distant and professional. What he actually felt was something quieter than all of those, something tired and honest and without theater. "I don't need the apology for me. I need it for Walter Harris. For the nurses who are working 2 patients' worth of load because your staffing model looks better on a spreadsheet than it performs in a ward. For the residents who came to that hospital because of its reputation and are now wondering what they signed up for." Patricia absorbed this. Her hands were flat on the table, and he could see the slight tremor in her fingers. "I know. And an apology isn't enough. You know that too." "Yes." She reached into her bag and pulled out a document, several pages stapled. She set it on the table between them. "I've drafted a proposal for the board. A full reversal of the staffing reductions, reinstatement of the pro bono surgical allocation at its original level, and a formal patient safety review committee with physician leadership. Not administrative oversight, physician leadership." Michael looked at the document without touching it. "What does the board say?" "I haven't presented it yet. I thought I should talk to you first." "Why?" She met his eyes again. "Because you're the one who was right. And I thought if I was going to ask anyone to trust that I understand that now, I should start with you." The coffee shop hummed around them. People with laptops and cups of tea and small, manageable problems. The steady white noise of a city conducting its business without drama. Michael picked up the document. Read the first page, then the second. He read it the way he read everything that mattered, completely, carefully, missing nothing. When he was done, he set it back on the table and straightened the pages against the flat surface with one finger. "The staffing committee needs a physician co-chair with veto authority on safety decisions. Not advisory, veto. That's non-negotiable." Patricia blinked. That would require a significant amendment to the administrative charter." "I know it would." "The board won't—" Michael's voice was level, not raised, not hard, but carrying weight of someone who has made a decision and is simply informing the other person of its existence. You came here because you wanted to know if you understand what went wrong. This is me telling you what went wrong. The problem was not that I was difficult. The problem was that there was no structural mechanism to protect patient safety from administrative pressure. The apology is fine. The proposal is a start. But without that mechanism, in 12 months, there's a different physician sitting in this chair having the same conversation with you. She was quiet. He could see her working through it, the board, the charter, the political capital required, all of it moving behind her eyes. If I get the board to agree to the physician veto authority, she said it slowly, testing the words, would you consider? I have other conversations happening right now. I have 48 hours to consider my options. What you do with that proposal between now and then is your business. But I'll tell you this. Whatever I decide about my future, the things in that document happen at Mercy Cross regardless, because those changes are right, not because of me, because of the patients. Patricia picked up the document, held it with both hands. You're a hard man, Dr. Torres. I'm a fair man. There's a difference. She nodded slowly, stood, extended her hand. He shook it, not warmly, not coldly, but honestly, the way you close a transaction that has been conducted with the respect both parties are due. For what it's worth, the surgical team asked about you this morning. All of them. Nurse Davis, she's threatening to file a formal grievance. 3 of your residents have already put inquiries in with other institutions. Tell them to hold. Tell them to give me 48 hours. She looked at him for a moment longer than the handshake required. You already know what you're going to do, don't you? It wasn't quite a question. He didn't quite answer it. He just looked at her with an expression of a man who has known for a long time who he is and what he's for, and has simply been waiting for the world to remember it too. Patricia Reynolds walked out of the coffee shop and turned right on the sidewalk, back toward the hospital, back toward the board meeting she was going to request as soon as she returned to her office, back toward the conversation that was going to be the hardest one she'd had in her administrative career, and also, he suspected, the first one that actually mattered. Michael sat for a moment after she left. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a text to the number he'd saved that morning under the name Scott/DOD. One question before the 48 hours. The civilian practice arrangement. What institution were you considering? The reply came back in 4 minutes. We had 3 in mind, but given your current situation, the most immediate option is Mercy Cross itself under a new contractual structure that would give you formal authority over patient safety protocols. The hospital board has already been contacted by the Office of the Surgeon General. They're aware of yesterday's events. We believe they will be highly motivated to reconsider their administrative priorities. Michael read the text twice, set the phone down, looked out the window at the street, the same street he'd walked down the day before with his daughter's hand in his and a termination letter in his pocket, and no particular idea of what came next. He thought about Sophia saying, I think he made it, but I think it was harder than he thought it would be. He thought about Walter Harris and his laminated accordion of photographs. He thought about David King's daughter, the 4-year-old, asleep on a waiting room chair while her mother read and waited and held herself together. He thought about what Corporal Whitfield's uncle had said, that the right people always end up exactly where they're supposed to be, even if it takes a minute. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. Marcus Johnson had been Michael's friend since they'd both been 22 years old and broke in Baltimore and had stayed friends through law school and medical school and deployments and divorces and all the other things that life does to people who are paying attention. Marcus took one look at the contract spread across his conference table and let out a long, slow breath through his nose that said everything his words hadn't gotten to yet. Talk. I'm reading. You've been reading for 12 minutes. Because it's 12 minutes worth of document, Michael. Marcus turned a page without looking up. He was a compact man, precise in his movements, with the stillness of someone who had learned early that in rooms where important things were being decided, the person who moved least often held the most power. The DoD arrangement is actually cleaner than I expected. The liability structure is solid, the on-call parameters are reasonable, and the indemnification clause is honestly, Michael, this is better than what most civilian surgeons get from their own malpractice carriers. He set down the DoD contract and picked up the second document, the draft that his paralegal had put together in the 2 hours since Michael had called from the coffee shop, based on the terms Michael had outlined on the phone and the framework that Patricia Reynolds had left on the table and the information from Scott's text about the Surgeon General's office. It was 12 pages. Michael had been specific. Marcus read for another 7 minutes. Then he set it down flat and looked at Michael directly. This is going to cause some people some significant discomfort. Good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm saying be prepared. Physician veto authority over safety decisions. That's the one that's going to get the most resistance. The board has never given a practicing clinician structural authority over administrative outcomes. It changes the power dynamic of the entire institution. That's the point. I know it's the point. Marcus leaned back. I'm your attorney, not your conscience, so I'm not going to tell you whether it's right. But I am going to tell you that if you walk into that boardroom with this document, you need to be prepared to walk out without a deal. Are you prepared for that? Michael didn't answer immediately. He sat with the question the way he sat with difficult diagnoses, not avoiding it, not rushing through it, but giving it the full weight it deserved. He thought about the nursing staff at Mercy Cross running ratios that compromised care. He thought about his residents who had come to that institution because of him and who were now, according to Patricia, already putting out inquiries. He thought about Walter Harris recovering in a room on the 4th floor of that hospital, alive because of a surgical team that Patricia Reynolds had tried to reduce by 30%. Yes, I'm prepared for that. Marcus studied him for a moment with the gaze of a man who has known another man for long enough to tell the difference between bravery and stubbornness, and who has learned specifically regarding this man that the line between those two things was thinner than it appeared from the outside. Okay, then let me tell you how we walk in there. The Mercy Cross Board of Directors met the following morning in the hospital's executive conference room on the 8th floor, the same room with the operational efficiency dashboard that Patricia Reynolds had installed 14 months ago, the one that tracked metrics in real time on a screen that now, Michael noted when he walked in, had been switched to screensaver mode. There were 7 board members. 4 of them he recognized from the annual physician board dinner that the hospital held every December and that Michael had attended twice, the second time only because Sophia had told him that showing up to things mattered even when you didn't want to be there. The other 3 were faces he knew from the hospital's website, a retired federal judge named Eleanor Thompson, a woman named Margaret Young who had founded the hospital's community outreach program 20 years ago and whose name was on the pediatric wing, and a man Michael didn't recognize who introduced himself as Dr. Kenneth White, retired cardiac surgeon, board member for 12 years. Patricia Reynolds was already seated at the side of the table when Michael entered with Marcus Johnson. She had presented the board with the patient safety proposal the previous afternoon. Michael knew because she'd texted him a single line at 6:47 p.m. Done. Room was not pleased. Meeting tomorrow confirmed. He had replied, I'll be there. The board chair was Eleanor Thompson. She had the manner of someone who had chaired difficult meetings before and would chair difficult meetings again, and found the whole enterprise more tiring than anyone outside of board governance would ever understand. Dr. Torres, thank you for coming. Thank you for the meeting. I want to be straightforward with you about where this board stands. She folded her hands. We are aware of the events of Tuesday afternoon. We have received communications from the Office of the Army Surgeon General expressing, and I am quoting directly, significant appreciation for Dr. Torres's contributions to military medical readiness. We have received calls from 3 members of the hospital's major donor base asking about the circumstances of your departure. And we have received a formal inquiry from the State Medical Board's Patient Safety Division regarding the staffing changes implemented over the past 14 months. She paused to let that last item land. "We are also aware that your patient outcomes during your tenure here were the strongest in the cardiac surgery unit's recorded history, that Nurse Davis has filed a formal grievance, and that 2 of your residents have issued letters threatening to transfer unless the situation is, and this is their word, resolved." Michael said nothing. Marcus beside him also said nothing. This was the arrangement they had agreed on in Marcus's office. Michael would speak when it was time to speak and not before, because the board needed to hear itself say the things it had been avoiding saying before it was ready to hear anything else. Dr. Kenneth White spoke next. "Dr. Torres, I want to ask you directly, is it your position that you would consider returning to this hospital?" "It depends entirely on the terms." "And what are those terms?" Marcus opened the folder and slid a copy of the 12-page contract across the table to Eleanor Thompson. Marcus had printed 8 copies, 1 for each board member and 1 for Patricia. The room read, or rather, the room began to read. And about 90 seconds in, Margaret Young looked up from the document with an expression of someone who has encountered an unexpected thing that she finds unexpectedly welcome. "Physician veto authority over patient safety decisions." She said it not as a complaint, as an observation. The way a person who has cared about a thing for a long time says the name of that thing when they finally hear someone else using it correctly. "That's correct." Michael's voice was steady. "The board has never—" A man at the end of the table whose name Michael hadn't caught started to speak. "I know, which is part of why we're sitting here." Eleanor Thompson set the document down with deliberateness of someone who has read enough contracts to know exactly where the weight is. "Dr. Torres, I want to understand your thinking on the veto provision. In practice, what does that mean? What does that look like on a Tuesday afternoon when an administrative decision conflicts with a physician's safety determination?" "It means the physician wins, not because physicians are always right about everything, but because when the question is specifically one of patient safety, staffing ratios, protocol standards, resource allocation that directly affects care outcomes, the person with medical training and direct clinical accountability makes the call. Full stop." A woman Michael recognized as Bridget Reeves, who ran a regional healthcare investment fund, leaned forward. "And if the physician is wrong? Then the Patient Safety Committee, which the contract specifies must include both physician and administrative representation, reviews the decision within 30 days and documents it formally. The veto can be challenged through that committee. But the default position is patient safety first and administrative convenience second. That's not radical. That's how hospitals were designed to work before the metric dashboards." He didn't look at the metric dashboard screensaver when he said it. He didn't need to. Patricia Reynolds had not spoken since he entered the room. She was sitting at the far end of the table with a stillness of someone who was doing the work of listening genuinely, not waiting for her turn to talk, but actually taking things in, which was, Michael thought, the most significant change he had observed in her since their coffee shop conversation the previous morning. Margaret Young set her copy of the contract down and looked at Michael with the direct gaze of a woman who has been around long enough to value the same quality in others. "I have a question, not about the contract, about you." "Go ahead." "Why here? You were terminated by this institution 48 hours ago. You have, based on what I understand, other offers on the table from organizations that have considerably more resources and considerably less to answer for. Why do you want to come back to Mercy Cross?" The room waited. Michael looked at Margaret Young, at the woman whose name was on the pediatric wing, who had built community outreach programs when it was neither fashionable nor financially convenient, who had sat on this board for 20 years, presumably because she believed the hospital was worth fighting for. Because Walter Harris is recovering on the 4th floor, and because the nurses who took care of him have been working compromised ratios for 6 months, and they haven't quit because they believe in what this hospital is supposed to be. And because I have 2 residents who came here specifically because of this department's reputation. And if they leave, that reputation leaves with them, and the patients who would have benefited from their training leave with it. He paused. I'm not interested in going somewhere easier, Ms. Young. I'm interested in this working the way it should work. That's the only reason I'm sitting at this table. Margaret Young nodded slowly, the nod of a person who was satisfied, not because she'd gotten the answer she wanted, but because she'd gotten a true one. Eleanor Thompson looked around the table. Some silent communication moved through the board in the way that groups of people who have worked together for a long time communicate through posture and expression and the microsecond hesitations that carry more information than words. We'll need 30 minutes. Dr. Torres, Mr. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind. They waited in the hallway outside. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets. Michael stood with his arms crossed, leaning slightly against the wall in the way that soldiers learn to rest while remaining alert, not fully at ease, but not burning energy unnecessarily either. You did well in there. Marcus's voice was quiet. I said what was true. That's what doing well looks like. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The young question, that was the real one. The real, everything else was negotiation. That was the question. I know. And your answer was good. A beat. It was also completely you, which is both your greatest professional asset and the reason we've had this exact conversation in this exact configuration 4 times in your career. Michael almost smiled. 4 times? 4 times, yes. Marcus shook his head with the fond exasperation of a man who has accepted a friend's fundamental nature as simply a feature of the relationship. You know, most people negotiate from a position of what they'll accept. You negotiate from a position of what's right, and then you wait to see if the world catches up. Has it worked? Marcus considered genuinely. More often than it should, statistically speaking, which I suspect tells us something about you and something about the world in equal measure. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. Down the hall, a nurse pushed a cart past them, glanced at Michael and did a visible double-take, the slight widening of eyes and involuntary half-step of recognition that people do when they see someone they hadn't expected to see in a place. Dr. Torres? She stopped. Her name badge read Chen, and he recognized her from the cardiac floor, one of the nurses who had been working the stretched ratios, who came in early and left late because the patients needed covering and there was no one else. Nurse Chen. She looked at him with about 7 different things happening behind her eyes at once. Surprise and relief, and something careful, the expression of someone who wants to ask a question and isn't sure if they're allowed to. Is everything? I'm in a meeting. Give me a little more time. She absorbed this, nodded, started to push her cart again, then stopped and turned back. Davis filed the grievance yesterday afternoon. She wanted you to know. She said to tell you it's in the system and she's not taking it back. Tell her I know. Tell her thank you. Chen nodded again, this time with a small compressed energy of someone containing a more significant reaction, and continued down the hall. Marcus watched her go. Your staff. My staff. The conference room door opened at the 27-minute mark. Eleanor Thompson stood in the doorway. Dr. Torres, please come back in. They had amended 3 clauses. The physician veto authority was intact. That, Eleanor Thompson said, had actually been the least contentious item once Margaret Young had spoken. The amendments were to the review committee structure, the timeline for the staffing corrections, and one additional clause that the board had added themselves, which Michael had not asked for and had not anticipated. We want to formally document the events of Tuesday in the hospital record, not as a legal protection, our counsel has advised us separately on that, but as an institutional acknowledgement. A record that states clearly what Dr. Torres's termination was based on, what occurred in the hours following, and what the board's position is in retrospect regarding the administrative decisions that led to that termination. Michael looked at her. Why? Because institutions have memory problems. Margaret Young's voice was firm. We make the same mistakes generation after generation because we don't write down the right things. We write down our successes, and we quietly dispose of our failures." She looked at the documentation provision in the amended contract. "This goes in the record. Future boards, future administrators, future physicians, they read what happened here and they understand what we learned. That's the clause." Michael looked at Marcus. Marcus gave the smallest possible nod, the nod that meant, "This is real, and it means what it sounds like." He looked back at Eleanor Thompson. "There's one more thing." "Go ahead." "Patricia Reynolds. She came to me yesterday unprompted. She brought a proposal. She was honest about what she'd gotten wrong, and she walked into this building and presented that proposal to this board when she didn't have to. I want that on the record, too. Whatever administrative review process is coming, and I assume there is one, I want it noted that she initiated the correction herself." The silence in the room had a different quality now. Patricia looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully name, something between gratitude and the discomfort of receiving something you know you haven't fully earned, and knowing the other person knows that too, and choosing to give it anyway. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. It's accurate. It goes in the record." Eleanor Thompson made a note. "Duly noted." The amended contract was signed at 11:43 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 2 days after a man had been walked out of the same building by security with a folded termination letter in his pocket. Marcus witnessed it. Margaret Young witnessed it. Patricia Reynolds signed the administrative countersignature with a hand that was, Michael noticed, not entirely steady. When the last signature was on the last page, Eleanor Thompson set down her pen and looked at Michael with an expression of a person who has been in many rooms where important things happened and who knows in this moment that this is one of those rooms. "Welcome back, Dr. Torres." "Thank you, Ms. Thompson." "When can you start?" "Monday. I have something I need to do first." He was at Walter Reed by 1:30 that afternoon. He called ahead. Colonel Wright had arranged clearance, and he walked through the trauma wing in his civilian clothes, blue tie loosened at the collar, past the nurse's station where a corporal gave him a visitor badge and pointed him down the hall. "Room 114. He knocked on the open door and looked in. David King was awake. He was propped up in the bed at an angle, IV in his arm, monitors tracking his vitals in the steady, reassuring way that monitors do when the numbers are moving in the right direction. His wife Angela was in the chair beside him, early 30s, natural hair pulled back, wearing an expression of someone who has spent 2 days oscillating between terror and relief, and has landed somewhere exhausted and grateful and not yet fully able to believe it's real. And on David's uninjured side, curled against him in the narrow available space with the absolute confidence of a small person who was determined that this is where she belongs, was a 4-year-old girl in a pink sweatshirt, asleep. Zoe. David looked up when Michael knocked, and something moved across the man's face, recognition even though they had never met consciously because David King had been sedated during the 43 minutes that Michael Torres had held his life in his hands at altitude in a military aircraft. But you know your surgeon somehow, in the way that the body knows things the conscious mind hasn't been told. "You know, Doc?" His voice was still rough. Vocal cords do strange things after intubation, but it carried. "Sergeant King?" Michael stepped inside. "I wanted to check on you." Angela stood up so quickly that the chair scraped. She crossed the room in 3 steps and took Michael's hand in both of hers, and she didn't say anything for a moment, and Michael let that be fine. "My husband. You brought my husband back. He did the hard part. He held on because of you." He didn't argue. There were moments when the most honest thing you could do was accept what someone needed to give you, because refusing it was its own kind of arrogance. "Can I?" He nodded toward David. Angela stepped aside. Michael approached the bed, checked the monitors with the automatic habitual glance of a physician who reads vital signs the way other people read clocks, reflexively, constantly, without having to think about it. David's pressure was good, heart rate normalized, oxygenation strong. "You look better than the last time I saw you." "I didn't know you saw me. I was kind of out." You were out. I'm glad you're not anymore." David looked at him with the direct, steady gaze of a man who has spent a career in situations where clarity was survival. "They told me what you did in the helicopter, where you were when they found you. I was walking home. You were fired that morning." "Yes." "And you still got in the helicopter. You needed a surgeon. That's what I am." David held his gaze for a long moment. Then he looked down at the small sleeping shape tucked against his side, at Zoe, who was breathing slowly and peacefully in the complete utter trust of a child asleep near her parent. And something moved in his face that was too large and too private for a stranger's room, and Michael looked away to give him the privacy of it. "My older one, Emma, she's 8. She wrote you a letter." Angela reached into her bag and produced a folded piece of paper. Notebook paper, the wide ruled kind, covered in the careful, oversized handwriting of a child who was taking the task seriously. She handed it to Michael. He unfolded it. "Dear Dr. Torres, my dad is alive because of you. My mom cried for 2 days, but now she's okay. My sister doesn't understand what happened, but I told her our dad came home. Thank you for being good at your job. Thank you for being a good person. Your friend, Emma King. P.S. My dad says you have a daughter. I hope she knows you are a hero." Michael read it twice, folded it carefully along its original creases, placed it in the inside pocket of his jacket, in the same place where a termination letter had lived for most of Tuesday afternoon. He stayed for 20 more minutes. He answered David's questions about recovery timeline, restrictions, what the follow-up care would look like, what to watch for. He spoke to Angela about the things spouses need to hear, which are different from the things patients need to hear, and he had learned over years that addressing both with equal directness was one of the things that distinguished a physician from a technician. When he left, David called after him. "Doc." He turned in the doorway. "Whatever happened with the job, it'll work out. Men like you, the real ones, they always land right." Michael looked at him, at the man in the hospital bed with his sleeping 4-year-old tucked against his side, and his wife's hand resting on the rail, and his vitals steady, and his future intact, because 43 minutes in a helicopter had gone the way they'd needed to go. Already did. He walked out of Walter Reed into the afternoon, and the sun was the same gold-slanted light it had been 2 days ago on the walk home from Sophia's school. The same city, the same light, the same man. And yet everything was arranged differently now, the way the same pieces of a thing can make a completely different picture depending on where you're standing when you look. He had one stop left before he picked up his daughter. He pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Rodriguez. She answered the way she always answered his calls. "Baby, how'd it go?" "I need a favor. Can you get Sophia from school today?" "Of course I can. Where are you going?" "There's someone I need to see. Someone who deserves to hear about this in person." "Walter?" Mrs. Rodriguez had lived 70 years and had the gift of people who've lived fully. She connected things. "Walter." She made a sound of deep approval. "Go. I'll have the child. And Michael, eat something today. I can hear from here that you haven't eaten." "I'll eat, Miss Rodriguez. I don't believe you, but I love you anyway." She hung up. He walked back to his car. The city moved around him. Thursday afternoon, ordinary and alive and indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just shifted in one man's life over the course of 54 hours. That was the thing about cities. They didn't pause. They didn't mark the moments. They just kept moving, and you either moved with them or you got still enough to let them flow around you. And Michael had learned in 41 years that both of those things were sometimes the right answer. He drove to Mercy Cross. He parked. He walked through the lobby, and the security guard at the front desk, a man named Ray, who had worked the entrance for as long as Michael had been at the hospital, looked up and saw him and sat up straighter in his chair with an expression that managed to be both surprised and entirely unsurprised at the same time. "Dr. Torres." "Hey, Ray. You coming back?" "Monday." Ray leaned back, smiled the slow, satisfied smile of a man who had been waiting to hear a particular piece of information and has now received it. "Figured. Room 412. He's been asking about you." Michael nodded, took the elevator to the 4th floor. The doors opened and he stepped out into the hallway that smelled like antiseptic and floor wax and the particular institutional non-smell of a place that works very hard to smell like nothing at all. Room 412 was at the end of the corridor on the left. The door was half open. He pushed it the rest of the way. Walter Harris was sitting up in bed with a crossword puzzle, his reading glasses low on his nose, and that laminated accordion of photographs visible in the pocket of his hospital gown. There, as always, close and present, the portable evidence of what a life is actually for. He looked up. His face did what faces do when they see the right person at the right moment. It didn't perform anything. It just opened. "Well, there he is." "There you are." Michael walked in, sat in the chair beside the bed, and for the first time in 54 hours, with no contract to negotiate and no board to face and no helicopter to board, and nothing between him and this moment except the ordinary human fact of two people sitting in a room together, Michael Torres took a long, slow breath and let the last 2 days settle into their final shape. Walter set down the crossword, folded his glasses, looked at Michael with the unhurried patience of a 63-year-old retired school principal who has learned that the most important things don't need to be rushed. "Son, you look like you've had yourself a week." 2 days. Sometimes that's the same thing. Sometimes. Walter reached into his gown pocket and pulled out the accordion of photographs. He unfolded it slowly, with the care of someone handling something irreplaceable, and held it out so Michael could see. 6 grandchildren in a chain of small plastic-framed windows, grinning, gap-toothed, various ages, completely and radiantly alive. "Because of you." Michael looked at the photographs for a long time. "Because of all of us." Walter nodded, folded the accordion back, returned it to his pocket, right against his chest where it always lived. Outside the room, the hospital moved in its constant necessary rhythms, carts and voices, and the frequency of a place that is always simultaneously holding grief and healing, loss and return, the ending and beginning of things. Michael sat in the middle of it, present and still, a man who had been fired and had saved a life and had negotiated his terms and had read a child's letter in a hospital room and had ended up, as he always ended up, exactly where the work required him to be. He stayed with Walter for an hour. When he left, it was time to pick up his daughter.